Hello there, my name is Christopher Daniels, and welcome to Red Love Leisures. I decided to do something different tonight. Rather than my usual format, whatever that format may be, I thought I would do a sit-down interview.
My name is Amanda Catarzi. I was raised in a cult, and I'm a survivor of sex trafficking. After escaping my trafficker, I dedicated the next 10 years of my life to fighting sex trafficking. I've had the opportunity to counsel the New Zealand government on their legislation surrounding prostitution. I've written federal legislation, and I've gone undercover to bust trafficking rings across the world. I'm currently running a successful copywriting agency, and I'm passionate about giving others a resonating, impactful voice.
The reason why your story caught my attention is because I feel really weird saying this statement, but I feel like human sex trafficking is like really big right now.
I mean, we have Jeffrey Epstein and the classic case of Jean Bonnet and the weird situation with her parents and her death. And we have some other sinister people in the media, and then there's a whole industry devoted to human and sex trafficking, and especially focused on saving the children. There's a lot of focus on the children being sold into sex trafficking. So thank you for coming on. Maybe you could share a little information about your own experiences with sex trafficking.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it is a really popular hot topic right now, which is good and bad, because sometimes it's good that there's finally recognition, but then it's bad because it becomes a buzzword and then everybody stops paying. It almost undermines the movement.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to watch it, because I've spent the past 10 years trying to convince people that this is happening in America. For whatever reason, people just don't want to see or hear it. They want to think that it's in Cambodia or Thailand, which it is, but it's also happening to your daughter's friend at school. So yeah, happy to talk about it.
I don't know if you felt this at first when you first started telling your story. There was a lot of resistance. It was just it was too uncomfortable, and it was a conversation nobody wanted to have.
It's icky, and I think it's so overwhelming that there doesn't seem like a solution. So people don't want to talk about a problem they can't solve. So I've spent, like I said, the past 10 years doing anti-sex trafficking work, and having to have that conversation with NFL players during a cocktail hour to get them to donate, right? That's a really difficult thing to kind of be like, hey guys, great night we're having here. Hey, sex trafficking, heard about it? Yeah. But thankfully, that gave me really good experience in how to talk about this subject in a way that there is hope. I've seen great things happen with great organizations. So will it be ever solved? No. But can we make a dent in it? Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your story as far as your story with sex trafficking? What age did it happen? Was your family involved, or was it completely separate from your family?
Yeah. So I was raised in the cult, right, which is ATI, Advanced Training Institute.
According to the website, HEI is the Advanced Training Institute, which is a biblically based home education program for families who desire to raise up sons and daughters who are mighty in spirit and able to impact the world for Jesus Christ.
Which is, Josh Duggar, if you saw him in the news recently, he's with that 19 and Counting TLC show. So they're from ATI. And so he just got arrested for 40 counts of heinous child pornography on his laptop. So needless to say, that whole experience really set me up for failure later on in life and kind of groomed me for this thing. So when I turned 23, all my trauma basically resurfaced that was unaddressed and made me really good pickings for a predator. And I was super vulnerable and super, super naive. So it wasn't like he just came to me as hey, you're going to do this. It was what we call the Romeo kind of pimp, to where he dates you, you think he's your your boyfriend and girlfriend, and things escalate, and it's a very slippery slope. And especially for someone like me who is really naive in how relationships work, and what a healthy one looks like, and never really been in one. He was telling me, this is how adults do relationship. This is how this works. Let me tell you, let me teach you. And I was like, oh, this doesn't feel right, but okay. And then there's just this systematic breaking down of boundaries to get you to a point of that. It's not like it just happens, but there's just a very tedious breaking down of personal boundaries of, the lines are blurred between abuse and what a healthy relationship looks like. And it's pretty toxic.
Yeah.
So yes, I was caught up in that for about 6 months. So fortunately, it was not very long. And fortunately and unfortunately, I was not exposed to drugs during my time, which is usually a tool. However, it was because I was being labor trafficked as well. So I was fighting MMA, and he was having me fight like every single weekend, acting as my manager, getting all that money. And I didn't get any of it with promises. So I couldn't have drugs because I was being tested by the fighting organizations. So that means I was present for everything, which is—
You were fighting what, sorry?
MMA.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I was actually pretty damn good at it. So
Yeah, that's very interesting. So he was like your manager.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Would you say pimp, or is that too extreme? Like,
oh no, yeah. So there's an interesting little divide here. So some people believe that, myself included, that prostitution is sex trafficking. Not everybody believes that. So some people believe that prostitution is a choice. So I'll interchangeably use prostitution, sex trafficking, pimp, trafficker, whereas a lot of people might not agree with that. So I've counseled New Zealand government on their stance. They legalized prostitution in 2006, I think. I can't remember. So I've met with New Zealand government to talk to them about that and counsel them on that subject before. So
that's very interesting because I worked as a sex worker for about 8 years, doing porn and then doing escorting and doing stripping.
Okay.
And I traveled the world doing it, but it's much different as a male escort. It's completely different worlds. And I don't really have much knowledge of what the females do. Like I know, but that wasn't my world,
Right.
And they're completely different. And so it's hard because whereas I would maybe side more with legalizing sex work. I don't know, because my experience with it was positive. It was I enjoyed myself, but as a man with a man, it's completely different than I hate to say it, but it's like with a woman with a man. The dynamic's completely different. The power struggle is different, and safety is definitely an issue, I would think, with females. I don't know if I'm just assuming or generalizing, but this is how I view it. And I don't really know any more than what I hear.
Yeah, and I've never had an opportunity to talk to someone like you who's been in that position. So that's a super interesting. I'm totally all ears to learn.
My time was spent in Las Vegas doing most of my work. So I was constantly at these high-end casinos, and the girls were there too. And the girls were there, they were getting paid 10 times more than I was getting paid to show up, but they had limitations as far as what they would and wouldn't do. With a male escorting, there was a sense of control in this situation, but with women it didn't feel like it was as secure as it was with the men, men on men.
Interesting. I never have thought of that. That's a really interesting dynamic for sure.
But I think sex work in general for females is just, I don't know, it's I don't necessarily agree with it really, and I don't know if that's hypocritical or whatnot.
Oh, interesting. That's so interesting to hear you say that.
Well, I feel like there's safeties and it's being compromised, and not that they're victims and they can't take care of themselves, but I just feel like they get taken advantage of a lot of times. I don't know if that resonates.
And that's why a lot of people say it should be legalized, because then you can set up parameters, you can set up unions and all that stuff. Which, when talking with New Zealand government, their issue was about 4 years after legalizing it, they saw a huge rise in child sex crimes towards children. And so it seems to cause this imbalance after a couple of years. And so my thing is government shouldn't tell you what you should do with your body. I believe in small government. However, when that jeopardizes a minority group or a vulnerable group of people, children, elderly, animals, whatever, then I have a problem. And it's something that I don't know how to fix. So yeah, people need their freedom, but at the same time, how do we protect children? And how can you draw those lines? I can't directly draw those lines from legalizing prostitution, but in every country we see that happen. So it's I don't know. I don't know.
The rise in child sex trafficking. Why do you think that happened? I'm curious.
I mean, the organization I was with and working with at that time had a belief that sex was like a drug. And when it was met a certain way, that it would no longer satisfy, and would need something more and more extreme. Kind of like they had a very conservative stance on porn and everything else. So they had that stance on pornography as well, obviously. So that was there. And I haven't really formed my own beliefs about that. I was just like, well, we just got to protect kids. And so my last position was actually working with CPS, which is the Department of Children and Families. We take children away. And so I was an anti-sex trafficking specialist for CPS, and that was pretty horrific. But that was mainly in Florida. So that's how I kind of integrated of like, well, there's only so much you can do with adults coming out of that lifestyle. But if we could make sure a child had every option available to them, no matter what their mom, what their dad did, or what kind of experience they had, and they still had a choice, then maybe we can nip some of that abuse in the bud and make sure they have total freedom to make that choice.
I'm curious, because when you say like I completely agree with you. Like, the rise with child sex trafficking, because it's true. Like once you sort of get everything you desire sexually, your fantasies, you want more. You got to have that next rush. You got to have whatever it is that you can't have. You need that now. So like I can see how it snowballs into that. And I'm just wondering, like, so when does it actually stop though with these people? Because it's like, well, how horrific do you have to get, or how depraved does it have to be for you to be fully satisfied? Like, what are we really searching for? I wonder.
And that's an interesting question, because I know there's a lot of questions about pedophilia arising right now, and like the driving forces behind that. I will say that my trafficker was raped as a child multiple times by older women. And he grew in a very violent sexual environment that he had the choice of to become a victim or become an abuser. Those were his only two choices. There was no go to therapy. There was no outside healthy influences. That was it. And he made his choice. That's not to rationalize anything he did or does. But I think it's a key inside the mind of an abuser. So I'm not saying every pedophile has had sexual trauma in their life. I will say 100% of the individuals I've worked with out of sex trafficking have had childhood sexual trauma at their root. So I think a lot of people don't want to hear that answer because it's expensive. Like getting really good therapy for people who don't deserve it, abusers, pedophiles, sex offenders. That's a really expensive treatment phase. Mm-hmm. And then that's a huge liability as well. Well, are they healed or are they faking it? Or, you don't know. But I that leads me to believe that I don't know if you're born with that unhealthy tendency, but then what is an unhealthy tendency? Then you get into really gray areas, right? Who am I to say that that's an unhealthy tendency? So.
Yeah. And there's, I don't know how true this is. Well, I do think it's true, but there's a push now to normalize pedophilia, and it really it bothers me when I hear that, and I hear a lot of it coming from like the gay side of it. Like there's this huge push in the LGBT community to normalize pedophilia, and I don't know if all the blame necessarily needs to be put on the LGBT community, right. But I don't know why exactly they're trying to push for it, or if it's even real. Like, do you feel like there's an agenda out there to like normalize it?